What's up everyone, Mulekick Media here, and today we're going to be doing my top 10 most disappointing games on PS4. Now do bear in mind that this list will be in my personal opinion, and when I say the word disappointing, I don't necessarily mean bad games, I just mean games that had tons and tons of hype before their release, but ultimately, when they came out and we got our chance to play it, they ultimately disappointed us against what we thought we were going to get. With that all being said, and you letting me know what you think in the comments section below, let's get straight into the video. So coming in at number 10, we have Battlefield Hardline. Now, this was a game that I saw as very unnecessary. I mean, we didn't really need this game. I mean, Battlefield 4 was working perfectly fine by the time this game came out. But Hardline was announced anyway, and although it was still a good game, it just fell incredibly short of the standards of the Battlefield series. When you also begin to consider that there were more people playing Battlefield 4 in the first week of Hardline's launch, it pretty much just tells you the story of how unpopular this game was. Barely anybody plays it now, and it's really sad because I do think this game tried to do new things, but it just had so many flaws, like a really uninteresting story, characters that weren't really that well developed, and a multiplayer mode that I just genuinely couldn't get myself interested into. It's definitely not a terrible game, and it's not one that I couldn't recommend, but I think if you do have Battlefield 4, this is probably not worth a purchase. At number 9, we have Uncharted Odyssey's favourite game of all time, The Order 1886. Cost £45 at launch, but yet you could beat the game in 6 hours, platinum it in 12, and the fact that even if the game didn't constantly force you to walk in sections, or have unskippable cutscenes, you could probably beat this game in 3 hours. That's how bad The Order 1886 is. And I haven't even touched upon the boring story. Characters that really weren't that memorable, apart from one cheeky Frenchman who barely shows up in the entire game, and gameplay that was so generic and boring to play. Although the Order 1886 is an absolute graphical masterpiece and probably one of the best looking games on the PS4, once you actually get your hands on the game and play it, it just ultimately doesn't feel like what it looks like. At number 8, we have Destiny, what was advertised to be Bungie's return to PlayStation, considering they had just finished with the Halo series. However, Destiny for me just was not an enjoyable and fun game to play. It definitely had its highs, like the fact that the game is still getting support almost 2 years after its release, and I can only applaud Bungie for that. However, I just personally could not find myself being very interested in Destiny. It had a very terrible story with an absolutely awful performance by Peter Dinklage, which makes it worse when you consider that he's by your side for almost the entire game. When you also consider that with the fact that I'm just not personally a massive fan of MMO games, you could easily understand why I'm not a big fan of Destiny. I still look forward to its sequel and to see how much it improves over the original, but as for the original game, I just couldn't really get into it, and it deserves its spot at number 8. So coming in at number 7, we have Assassin's Creed Unity. In my opinion, the lowest point of the Assassin's Creed series. Now, the game did try and do some good things, like trying to, put a bigger emphasis on, multiple ways to do missions and having more dense open world. However, what that resulted in was an opening day launch that rendered the game almost unplayable. Even on the PC, it took a fair few months to even get fixed. And even when the game was properly working, it still felt like a complete downgrade, with a story that I couldn't really get interested into. Arno was just not a very likable character, and he felt very emotionless in my personal opinion. But also with the amount of bugs and glitches in the game still in after launch, it just wasn't a very enjoyable game, and just missed that charm and humour that I really loved in Assassin's Creed 4. At number 6, we have Killzone Shadowfall, Guerrilla Games' latest game to release. Although Killzone Shadowfall definitely did some things really good, yet again, still being one of the best looking games on PS4, despite it being a launch title, it definitely also held up in terms of the multiplayer, which was still very fun to play. However, it was the single player which really let me down. I was a bit disappointed in Killzone 3's single player, but Shadowfall took it to a whole new level. Your main character was so unlikable and really badly voice acted, and the voice acting itself in the game was so uneven. There were some really good performances, but then there were some absolutely terrible ones. You couldn't follow the story at all because it was way too complex and far too stretched out. Missions were put together randomly. One mission would feel absolutely amazing to play and really open, while others would feel incredibly linear and similar to what you would probably get in Call of Duty. Although Shadowfall still is a good game, if you're someone who really likes your multiplayer, you still might like this game. For me, the multiplayer just was not as engaging as 2 or 3's, and ultimately I can't really recommend that you purchase this game. At number 5, we have Call of Duty Ghosts. Easily the worst Call of Duty in the entire series. I mean, the campaign on its own would deserve its place at number 5, but when you also factorize the multiplayer as well, really, I could see this being higher on most people's disappointments list. The campaign was just really, really boring to me. There was no story at all. I didn't care about the characters, and the ending made absolutely no sense. It pretty much throws all logic out the window, just so the game can have a sequel, which isn't going to happen with the announcement of Infinite Warfare, which is pretty stupid on their behalf. The multiplayer as well just wasn't good. I just didn't like the multiplayer. For me, when you consider the multiplayers that we've had beforehand, like, even Black Ops 2 multiplayer was vastly superior to this one, in my personal opinion. I just couldn't get into Ghosts at all. Like, the only positives I could find with Ghosts were the Riley sections, because they felt new and unique, and also maybe the Extinction mode, but I didn't find it anywhere near as engaging as the Treyarch Zombies mode. And for that, I quickly, just became very disinterested in this game, and kind of almost killed off my interest in the franchise, if it weren't for Advanced Warfare bringing me back into it. At number 4, we have the first of 2 Far Cry games to make the list, and here we have Far Cry 4. I thought this game was going to be absolutely amazing. The demos that we got of this game at E3 led us all to believe that we were going to be getting a great new experience on the PS4 that wasn't going to copy what we got in Far Cry 3. Unfortunately, the latter ended up happening, and it ended up being, for me, probably one of the biggest disappointments of 2014. Although the open world in itself was very fun to explore, the game just felt way too similar to Far Cry 3 in terms of its approach. When you also begin to consider as well that the main villain, despite good, just was not in the game much, and as a result I couldn't connect with him as much as I could with Vass in the previous games. The multiplayer mode as well was quickly shoved aside and got no support at all, and considering the very little modes it had, I could easily see why. Also, the open world just didn't feel as memorable as 3's. It felt a lot smaller and more contained, and as a result, I just couldn't really enjoy going around the world, even though it was much easier to explore. Overall, Far Cry 4 is still a good game. My opinion probably comes from this game because of the fact that I have played Far Cry 3 a lot, and the fact that 4 was so similar. If you haven't played Far Cry 3, I could understand why you'd like this game, but for someone like me, who played the hell out of 3, then I can understand why some of you may not be the biggest fan of Far Cry 4, just like me. At number 3, we have Star Wars Battlefront. And I knew this game was going to be pretty bad, but yet for some reason, I still felt compelled to go ahead and buy it. And it's probably one of the purchases I regret the most, because Battlefront was fun for the first week I played it, and then I realised how bad it was. It has very little to no content for the money that you will pay for it. You probably get more value out of the previous 2 Battlefront games compared to this one. And that's even without the online services, which recently just got shut down. Star Wars Battlefront has no single player campaign, meaning that you're only stuck with the multiplayer modes, but them in themselves are not very interesting. Yes, there are a good variety of modes, but you'll only be playing the same 2, because all the other ones feel really pointless additions, and once you've played those 2 modes over and over again, it becomes repetitive and boring, and just not fun at all. Although yes, the sound effects and the licensing is used to very good effects, ultimately Battlefront was a game that lacked very little in content for what we were paying for it. If you were someone who paid top dollar for this game when you first brought it, I could definitely understand why you got incredibly frustrated by this game. Hopefully EA can learn from their mistake and make a better sequel, but that depends on how much money they want soaked in their hands. And that's why Battlefront enters the top 3. Number 2 is Far Cry Primal. Now, I didn't think the Far Cry series could get any worse after Far Cry 4, but unfortunately it did, because they decided to milk the franchise even more and release Far Cry Primal a year and 4 months after Far Cry 4's release. And it showed. Primal was not only pretty negatively received by most Far Cry fans, but it was just a boring game to play. There was so little in the variety of combat, considering the fact that the majority of the time you were using a melee weapon to attack people, either that or a bow, but that was it. There were not many other options to be able to attack encounters. As a result, it completely took away from the fun of what made the previous 3 Far Cry games so fun. I say 3 because I don't really want to class 4 as a game, but we have to anyway. Also, I just didn't like the story at all, and considering the fact that the game isn't even spoken in English at all, but some made-up primal language, I just found it really hard to not only get interested in the story, but to also like the characters. None of them were interesting. What's even worse is the fact that the open world is a direct rip-off of Far Cry 4's. That just shows you how much effort they put into this game. Absolutely zero. I can commend Ubisoft for trying to do something different, but ultimately in the end, it worked against their favour, because what we got was a very unenjoyable game to play, and one that I cannot recommend at all for anyone to pick up. Even if you want a caveman simulator, this game is not for you. And finally, at the number 1 spot, and a game that will either surprise you because you've never heard of my opinion on this game, or probably will not surprise you because I've stated it so many times. My number 1 for the most disappointing game on PS4 is Batman Arkham Knight. And I really didn't want to put this game at number 1, but in the end I had to, because I was so hyped for this game. I thought this game was going to be the best Arkham game in the series. We'd seen all the gameplay beforehand. I was convinced that I was going to be getting the ultimate Batman experience. However, what I ended up getting was a game that ultimately, in my opinion, is probably the worst out of the entire series. And like I said, I really wanted to like this game, but it just didn't do anything new or exceptional that actually worked. Most of the new elements that Knight brought into its game just simply were not good additions. The Batmobile, although fun to drive around in combat felt so repetitive and boring, and the game constantly forces you to use it all of the time. Also, the story just wasn't up to par with the previous games. Even Origins had a better story, and many people slam that game, and I personally think that game is much, much better than this. The story just wasn't that great. It ended up being another tale about Batman and Joker, even though Rocksteady were trying to hide it from us the entire time. And even though we probably saw it was coming, it ended up becoming the main story of the entire game. Scarecrow, for all of his pre-press release and things like that, was basically just an excuse to have Joker back for another game. If it were for that, really, Scarecrow doesn't even really need to be in the game, because the Batman was already seeing these hallucinations beforehand. But that's getting too complicated, and if you want to see my full rant on this game, then please just go and check out a video in the description. I'm pretty sure I'll just leave it in there. But Arkham Knight was just really disappointing, not just because of the fact that the story was bad and the Batmobile. Just the side missions as well were very repetitive. Missions in themselves were just incredibly repetitive. They just didn't feel very new. It was the same thing over and over again with the side missions. And even worse is that the majority of them required you to use the Batmobile. Another thing I didn't like about this game was the boss battles. I hated them. There were so few, and the ones that you did get were so Batmobile-centric that they were just boring, and most times even easy. Like, when the hell are Arkham boss battles supposed to be easy? They never are. They're supposed to challenge you, but these ones didn't. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only one that even challenged me in the slightest was a challenge room segment with the Arkham Knight. But even that was easy. And the only reason it was difficult was because it was so linear. You only had one pathway to take him out. And it's just such a dumb game. I think really the Arkham series is officially dead now, and I hope they don't make another one. This game killed it off for me, and it was just such a big disappointment. I could easily rant about more stuff that I didn't like about this game, but like I said, I'll just leave a link in the description to my review on Arkham Knight, and so you can get the full experience of why I hate the game so much. But yeah, Arkham Knight's number 1. Deserves to be there. And yeah, it's a dark day. But anywho, that's it for today's video. Of course, let me know in the comment section below what you would rank these games, what's your top 10 most disappointing games on PS4. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching, and hope to see you again next time.